Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Georgette, I'm the mom.
And I'm TJ, I'm the son, and this is Oliver, he's the cat. He's glaring at me.
And we both work and study in the field of psychology, and we are passionate about sharing what we know with you so that you can live your best life.
Yeah, Oliver doesn't have any degrees, so don't listen to what he has to say.
So today we're going to talk about conflict. The struggle between opposing forces, right? It's actually based on the Latin word conflict, which means to strike two things at the same time.
Ooh, strike two things at the same time. That's interesting.
So we're going to first define three different types of conflicts. So there's intrapersonal conflicts, which are conflicts within yourself. They're individual conflicts, and usually they display as having like two motives or two goals. They're interpersonal, which are between individuals. And then there's unconscious conflicts, and those are repressed desires or wishes that you don't even know necessarily you have until they emerge, until they cause a kind of a bigger problem. We're going to talk more about those next week, because next week we're going to talk about id, ego, superego, and defense mechanisms. So look forward to that. So first let's talk about intrapersonal conflicts, and there are four types of those. There is approach, which basically means you have two positive choices that are equally attractive, right? We experience that often in our daily lives. What do you want to eat? Right?
Yeah. What sounds good right now?
Yeah.
Pizza, Mexican food, I don't know.
Right. And then we have avoidance, where you have two negative options at the same time, right?
The better of two evils.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't get what you want, got to get what you can.
Yeah. Approach avoidance, which are the most complex and difficult to resolve. And here is where the positive comes with a negative. So one example usually that I think of right off the bat is, I want a bowl of ice cream, but I also know it'll make my stomach hurt. So it comes with, negatives.
It'll make your stomach less six-packy,
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then we have the multiple approach avoidant conflicts, where we have options that both have positive and negatives. And that's when you find yourself making those
big
pros and
life
con
choices.
lists.
Yeah, right. Like, should I move away to go to school? Should I stay here to go to school? Should I go to school? Should I not? And big life choices, right?
Yeah. Like how do you resolve those? Like I usually make like a pros and cons list.
Of course. Yeah. But for me, it's also like whichever decision gets decided, that is going to be the right decision, because it's going to be the one I chose. So just got to go with whichever one I'm feeling.
Right. You have to just own it and embrace it and move with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I found a couple of different approaches to resolving conflicts. The first, actually both have three steps. The first has three phases, and the phase one is facilitate, listening, and speaking. Phase 2 is maintaining open mind, and phase 3 is moving forward. So let's talk about that approach, resolving conflicts first, because it's the most comprehensive, and then maybe I'll immerse the other stuff in as we go along. But the first part of facilitating and listening is don't hear the attack. Try to hear the information.
Yeah. Or hear if it's not necessarily information, but maybe it's proof that maybe this is coming from an alternative source. Maybe this person's conflict with you is maybe a conflict with themselves or a conflict elsewhere. And there's proper thinking and conscious thoughts that you can put in that will most likely always dim down the emotional response or the emotional pull you feel towards doing some of those negative things right off the bat.
And along that same phase, resist the urge to attack. Here's you're changing the conversation from the inside, and you're going to use more I statements. I feel, I want, to help avoid that attack feeling.
Attacking is not going to help you in any way, shape, or form, because that person's natural reaction is going to be to fight back.
You just close down the conversation right there. Right?
Just based on the way that you are sounding or the tone that you have maybe subconsciously just let out.
Talk to the other person's best self. So appeal to their higher nature.
Make them feel like they're, nice and cool. Yeah.
Right. Differentiate needs, interests, and strategies. Those are all very different things, and make sure that you understand what people's basic needs are, what their interests are, and what their strategies are, because there are different approaches you can take. Right. As long as you have that information. Acknowledging people's emotions.
Of course.
Differentiating between acknowledgement and agreement. When we're talking with somebody, we don't have to agree, right?
Well, I understand.
Yeah, but we have to acknowledge what they're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get your perspective,
Right.
because that person's perspective is right in their eyes because it only has to make sense to them. So instead of making a conflict against two stubborn, just be a little bit more open to the other perspectives and the other possibilities, because it may be the one thing that saved your life in the conflict.
Right. When listening, avoid making suggestions. Now, this is hard to do, I think. We want to fix. We want to help, right?
Yeah. And we all think that we can fix and help, especially our parents out there. Ooh.
I was going to say I think that's a bit of a gender thing too, because I think that men want to fix things automatically.
Of course.
And yeah, so I think that sometimes you don't actually need somebody to fix something. Sometimes you just need somebody to acknowledge what you're going through, right?
Yeah, and you'll find more often than not, like I said, just be there to listen and to take it in, but you'll know when they want you to talk back. They'll know when they actually want your response. They'll make it pretty clear, because at that point, they've already made their emotions clear. They're not going to necessarily hold back on whether they do or do not want you to talk, so just ride it out until it's your... Oh, we're just...
Oliver's doing something.
She's knocking stuff down. Keep it going.
Differentiate between evaluation and observation. Create a no judgment zone.
Yeah, you can never... No, there's no room for judgment because you have no understanding of all the things that came into making that person the way that it is.
And test your assumptions. Relinquish them if they prove false. So all that falls underneath the category of facilitating the listening and speaking. And going back to the other strategy of collaborative conflict resolution, where it focuses more on recognizing the problem, exploring the underlying concerns, and creating a mutually agreeable solution. Some distractions to that and kind of support the other strategy is, again, avoid making suggestions. Listen. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't listen well. Sometimes I'm so busy thinking about what I'm going to say next that I haven't even heard what they're saying. I'm making an assumption about what they're going to say, and I already have my response. We need to stop and listen. That is a big thing.
And why does that happen? Because in conflicts, we're in, believe it or not, in that fight, flight, or freeze response, even from that psychological standpoint. So like you said, you think so kind of one-track mind is moving so quickly because we're losing the ability to get our own cognitive thoughts in as our heart rate is pumping and our body's working harder. Right. And yeah, it absolutely leads to exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Take them seriously, other people's perspectives. Don't diminish them just because they're not yours. So sometimes we have a tendency to do that. And focus on what you want, not what you don't want, because that will keep it positive. And then lastly, their suggestions in that first stage is to watch your tone. Keep it relaxed and friendly.
I think tone is one of the biggest helpers here. Even tone when it comes to how you talk to yourself. Right? It's really simple, like, hey, let's talk, or hey, let's talk. And people don't realize how big of a difference even the smallest shift is. So just the more control you can get over that voice and over that tone, the more calm you can present yourself, the greater likelihood that person's going to mirror it back.
Right. Step 2 or phase 2 would be to maintain an open mind. So they say develop a curiosity in difficult situations.
Yeah. Developing the neurological plasticity to possibly go to a better option when negative external stimuli are being given to you.
Oh, yeah.
You like that?
Assume useful dialogue is possible even when it seems unlikely.
Ooh, I like that.
And if you're making things worse, stop.
Stop and get that breath in. Start slowing things down.
Yeah.
Start slowing
we
things
talked
down.
about the pause, emotional regulation.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to slow things down.
Pause for the
Slow
cause.
it with your breath. The easiest mechanism we have in our body to start to relax some of those emotions that are kind of getting us crazy and kind of getting us into thoughts and words that aren't even necessarily helping the situation we can't see.
Right,
Can't see, but we need to see.
Absolutely. Figure out what's happening, not whose fault it is. We are a competitive people.
Yeah,
we like to win. We like to be right. Sometimes it's not about right or wrong.
And more often, a lot of conflict is just because egos.
Absolutely.
You just don't want to be wrong.
Right. And that aligns nicely with the other strategy, exploring underlying concerns. That would be phase 2 of the other strategy. And that aligns very nicely, actually, because they call it committing to the process of discovery. So the goal is to find out the underlying factors that are the issue and come up with a mutually agreeable
So just
solution.
like maintaining an open mind.
Right.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Absolutely. And don't be concerned with winning. Focus on learning. Like, what can you learn from this process? All right.
Very simple. Simply could be to learn to not bring it up to that person again. Mm-hmm. Or just or conscious things that you can say the next time that might help you when you're kind of getting all worked up.
Right. Phase 3, look for ways to move forward. And on the other perspective, create a mutually agreeable solution. So again, they kind of line, but they're worded a little differently. Yeah. So acknowledge the conflict. Assume undiscovered options exist. Be explicit about your agreements. And expect and plan for future conflict. That's what TJ was just talking about. If this is a hot button, it likely will come up again. Along those same lines, believe that a solution is possible. Be open. Don't suggest what somebody else should do. Focus on your contributions to the solution, and then check for satisfaction. This is what we agreed on. Are you okay with that? Mm-hmm. That's a good and nice question to ask, I think.
Yeah. And when a good quote that I like to kind of pop into my head, I know Mom's heard this before, when it comes to conflicts with other people, arguing with a fool proves that there are two.
Yeah.
Gotta be both, but you gotta let it slide off. Doesn't matter what people say.
Now, most of us don't like conflict, but conflict is something we can experience on different levels every day. Internal, external.
And very easily more internal conflicts.
And some of us, we just choose to avoid conflict because it's uncomfortable, right? Yeah. But avoiding it does not make it go away. And if anything, it can escalate it. So you want to be careful about doing that because it's not very productive. Mm-hmm. Why we sometimes avoid conflicts is because we make some false assumptions about people. We assume that we know what their goals are. The suggestion for that is to ask neutral questions. Dive a little deeper. Well, why is it that you want to do that? Because if you know the why, maybe you can come up with a different strategy that works for both of you, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we mistake determination for rigidity. If somebody is working on a project with you and they've got an idea and they want to move forward and you kind of feel like you're not being included in that process, you're the one making that assumption. Just because somebody's enthusiastic doesn't mean they're inflexible about.
Absolutely right.
Because I do that. I'm one of those people, when I get an idea, I'm like, oh, right, let's do this and this and this. But I love to get other people's contributions. I think the project ends up better.
So even like you said, we talked about the intrapersonal, but the intrapersonal oftentimes creates interpersonal with other people. Because like you said, we love to fill in other people's thoughts. And we love to make ourselves the story in everybody else's conflicts in life. So we think that there's a lot more, it's a little more personal. Yeah. When we're involved. And that's where we get the need to emotionally regulate and the need to determine and understand how to make it through conflict, because we can't do it naturally on our own very well.
Right.
Yeah.
And the biggest reason they say that we don't, or that we avoid conflicts, is we lack confidence. We don't see a clear way to bring up the issue and resolve it peacefully. So we're just not going to do it, right?
And then that's okay, but the only thing that you're being forced to make is either a physical change, not being around that person anymore, or an internal, which is how you can cognitively work through things that they're saying to you, because you're not choosing to even make them aware. So if you are choosing not to make them aware of the conflict, then you're forcing yourself to go through a more intense internal conflict.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make sense.
If you find yourself apologizing, agreeing, or accommodating, the 3 A's, then you're doing the 4th A. You're avoiding.
Dang. Boom. Oh. I almost choked on my
mic
tea.
Drop,
oh my
but that's my mic.
Almost choked on my... Yeah, just...
Yeah, I do this. I don't like conflict. You know what? I like conflict. I can handle conflict in my work, in my personal. I tend to avoid it. I'm an accommodator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to that point, there's certain jobs that force you to. I used to not necessarily like conflict so much, and now I'm a lot better at it. I'm in verbal conflicts every day so it's something that you get more comfortable with, and that with practice, if this is a weakness, like the other weaknesses in your life, practicing certain things that could be helpful from a cognitive standpoint will help you perform better. When you perform better, you'll be better, and when you are better, you're happier, and boom.
I mean, I think about those conflicts where I avoid them. And they usually, I feel it internally. Like I feel the stress I'm placing on my life and my body.
Yeah.
It weighs on me. So we want to move from conflict avoidance to conflict resilience.
Conflict resilience.
That's where we want to go.
Cognitively working through it. How can we make this, at least in your perspective, something that you can work through? Because people get stuck on these conflicts.
Because if you're in a relationship and you are avoiding those conflicts, then what you're doing is you're hiding your true feelings, you're storing up those frustrations, which is going to build resentment, and you're going to neglect your own needs. None of that is good. You need to speak up and embrace conflict.
Say it with your chest.
And you can do it, as we talked through today, you can do that in a productive manner, in a collaborative manner.
Yeah.
So this week, we want you to work towards moving from that conflict avoidant behavior to being more conflict resilient so that you can live your best life.
Boom. And boom goes the dynamite.